to see the operations plan, or at least part of it. In fact, let me just make it larger here. Okay, that should be available to everybody. Anybody having trouble seeing any bits of it? Or is everybody?
Nope, looks good.
Okay. So this is a culmination of a lot of thinking. I've been writing the what we used to call the section emergency communications plans for most of the last decade or so. Even when I wasn't SEC, just the job has always kind of fallen to me. But I originally inherited a plan that had been written by Tom Matisco when I became SEC. And it was many more pages longer than the one that we've recently changed. It had gotten into such detail that it was dense and almost impossible for anyone to fully understand other than the original writer. Even there was some question marks. So over time, I've pared it down and added in stuff we needed that was more relevant. We've always tried to separate out anything that was training related. But when we got into WinLink and to digital operations, we decided we needed to set some standards in there till they became part of the training regimen. And now I'm going in and pulling that stuff back out again. So what we are ending up with now is more of a bare bones approach to the plan. It's more of a skeleton than it is a completely fleshed out body, because the training does the rest. Assuming we always keep the training so that it's in compliance with what's in the plan. So this basically got a heavy dose of KISS principle. And if you go through it, compare it to the old one page by page, you'll notice that there are some sections that are completely missing. A whole bunch of the attachments are gone. And a lot of the stuff has been very compressed. A lot of the language has been cut down, trying to make it a little easier to read. One of the problems we've always had with it is we put this plan out there and we'll go for a show of hands in a class, say, who's read the plan? 2 hands out of 50 go up. The plan is useless unless people know it. And unfortunately, some of those hands that didn't go up also included ECs. If they haven't read the section plan, you know, they're kind of lost and don't know it, especially when something really happens. So the definitions really didn't change much, except that we had attempted a number of years ago to create some temporary titles that reflected what they use in the, incident command system. So we had ARES communications officer and other things like that, who are basically stand-ins for the positions normally held. We say, you know, that's just so complicated. No one's going to remember it. We don't drill with it. We don't use it. Let's get rid of it and go back to just saying acting SEC or acting EC, whoever is in that position at that moment in time. If you go to bed at night and you hand off your job to someone else, they become acting with your title. Simpler. Didn't even put that in the plan because it's sort of what everybody does automatically. So that got cleaned out. And let's see, anything else we added here? I don't think so. I think most of what's here is pretty much the way it was. We get to the purpose and limits of the plan. Not a whole lot of changes here. I mean, our purpose is pretty much the way it was, but I did cut down the wording a little bit, as I recall. I wish I had the old plan in front of me too right now, so I could point out specific changes. But the other big change, of course, is the title of the whole document. It used to be called the Emergency Communications Plan. And I don't know how many times over the years I've had people point out, usually from other agencies, that this is not a communications plan, it's an operations plan. And they're right. So we finally made it communications plan. I had proposed to Wayne that we call it disaster communications plan, but he thought that was a step too far all at once. So we didn't do that. Um, Cooperation with the state of New Hampshire has not really changed. I did tweak the wording in here a bit to make it more accurate, more succinct, and to reflect some changes that have occurred since the last rewrite. One of the other audiences for this plan, at least in theory, are the other agencies we deal with. So if Red Cross needs to know how we operate, they can pull up this plan and read it. Do I believe that anyone has ever done so? The only person I know who ever read it was John Wynn, only because I stuffed a copy into his hand and sat there years ago. I said, I want you to read it and ask me questions. We were there for an hour or so, but he did read at least that once. Now that it's a lot shorter, I hope maybe we can get some other agency people to read it too. But every member should be reading this thing. The activation procedures are the same. The activation status levels are different. So if you look at section 4.0, we have status 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there's always been 4 levels. There's still 4 levels. But every once in a while, somebody at the state decides it's time to change how they describe them. And I just redid ours to more closely match what they have now. And we do that training in 4 weeks. I have some graphics on that. But basically, it's status 1 is every day today. Status 2, heads up, something might be going on. Status 3, something's going on, but we don't have to put everybody in the field yet. And status 4 is all hands on deck. And that's pretty much the way that the state has theirs. The activation procedures, I think we need to visit again and think about this, because really the only thing we've had for years formally is the call tree. And as we've discovered over time, that becomes problematic because people are not really good about updating us on their information. I'll put out a call system update, and then a week later I'll get, oh, by the way, 4 of my guys have changed. I've got to do it all over again. It's not really helpful, but we may want to think about making email via the group the first alert. And if there is no internet available because it says it's an earthquake and we've suddenly lost everything, unlike a hurricane where we're going to be alerting in advance of any damage. That's a place where the telephone call tree might work, might not. But I think we need to do something slightly different with this and look at how we do our call tree and so on. Right now, we're just saying here, status 1, nothing, obviously. Status 2 can be done by email. Status 3 and 4, using the activation plan, attachment A, and call-ups on net frequencies in addition to email. But we may want to revisit that. People ought to think about it a bit. I don't think I made too many other changes in this section. And if anyone has any questions, open your mic up and yell at me. I did shorten up the deactivation procedures and the activation procedures for the section. There's a lot less wordy in there. And there's group activation operations and deactivation is greatly reduced. I combined a number of things in there. And this is really a very 40,000 foot view of what should be going on at the local level. The other thing you'll notice is that I refer to groups. In the years past, and this is ARES-wide, that's not just New Hampshire, we've had a problem with what we call the lowest level group. They used to be called counties. Well, that's fine in about 45 states. But there's all of New England, counties are kind of irrelevant. And counties are less relevant in some states than in others. But if we refer to it as the group level, as opposed to the section level. I think that's a lot clearer. So throughout the plan, you will now see reference to group instead of county. Let's see here. Yeah, I think this is basically unchanged in terms of effect, but the way it's laid out is different. And it's just made a lot more succinct. The message handling protocols was cut way back. A lot of this has become a training issue more than anything else. And I tried to describe the net system as simply as possible. Since the last one was written, we have brought NBEMS and WinLink right to the front of operations. At that time, they were still experimental. That has been reflected throughout this document now. And anywhere we were dealing with what would be really a training issue is gone. It's just now operational. And that should make this easier for everybody. One of the things for training and also for development is that people like George, N1GB, should probably become familiar with this and have input, because he is really doing the training for us on the digital modes. We don't have anybody doing training on WinLink per se at this point, other than at the Academy, which we're temporarily without. And that brings up another issue beyond our borders, but we need to make sure that any training going on is relevant and follows the operations plan. And if there are conflicts that are discovered or problems, we need feedback on those so that we can update the plan or make corrections. I don't think there's anything in here. It's really different. Yeah, one thing I did add here, if you look at 8.08, this should be a training issue, but I'm going to, because we've had problems with this just literally forever, I decided that I was going to stick it right smack dab in the plan. It says, do not change or paraphrase messages in any way, underlined boldface. Only the message's author may do so. This should be our mantra. Remember that. Which brings up another training issue that we really have never dealt with, and that's readback. When you're given a message, if it's verbal or written, you read the whole thing back immediately to make sure that it was understood correctly. That's done on the Shares network. It's done in Mars. As far as I know, I'm not a Mars guy, but I've been told that's the way it's done. And readback, maybe, we should be putting that into our training automatically. Yeah, the routing is the same as it's always been, except it's more succinct here. And I would argue that the tactical call signs might be a training issue, but it's also a standards issue. So I put that in here. Official messages must be signed by the author. I don't think that was in here before. I think I've added that one. And SITREPs used to be somewhere else. It was a whole separate section, and I just merged it into here. Same with the group club call signs. How many of the groups still have those?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
I know some of the groups lost them. I know Sullivan, I think, is gone. Or is Sullivan being held by you, Carrie? Is it? Forget. You do. Okay. I see your head nodding.
Yeah, it's about a half, I think, maybe a little more than half of them. And then we kept some of the ones at the state level.
Right.
I got rid of a couple.
The main purpose for even having those at this stage is for WinLink. Because if you're handing off shifts and all of a sudden an address changes, the senders have no idea that that's happened. So if there's a static address, and this is the same for served agencies because they have the same problem. I think a lot of them have started to figure it out because I've started to see more EOC at or Kensington EOC at yahoo.com. Unfortunate problem is we don't know a lot of those, and they tend to change. An EC or an emergency manager changes, and he changes all the addresses, or she. So that's an issue for us, broad stroke. We've all got it. I don't know if there's an easy solution. I think, for us trying to change that be like the tail trying to wag the dog. But if we can get people at the state level rather, and VOAD talking about standardized email addresses that can stay in an address book forever, or as close to forever as we can get in this world, that would be very valuable to everybody during an emergency. There are other issues of WinLink that need to be thought about. One of the biggest problems has always been that there's a bottleneck. If you've got a whole bunch of different WinLink stations all trying to access a fairly limited number of remote stations to pick up email, the propagation is going to limit your access. There's only going to be a few that are within propagation range, and you could have a real traffic jam. So we need to think about that too. The other options. One option is, of course, not to have too many WinLink stations in New Hampshire all at once. One per group and one at the section level is probably the safest way to approach that. And the other way around that is to also have shares use and possibly even Mars WinLink in use as alternate paths. But we have to look at the legality of that depending on who the sender and addressee are. And maybe work that into the plan at some point. So the non-communications assignments is the same. ARRL HQ notification and support, I did make some changes in there. I don't remember what they were. I know I compressed it a lot. The bottom line here is that when we activate, other people need to know. And if it's really limited and isn't likely to spread or get worse, then maybe a quick notification to ARRL is not that important. But if it's something that could potentially grow, they need to know. And the reason is that we have an ARES map program in theory up here in the region. We don't really have one that's set up and working. So you may need them to pull extra resources for you. And quite frankly, they got nothing else to do during that emergency. Well, you do. So put them to work, getting you more resources. And understand they're not going to come very fast, but that's why we notify them. That, and if there's going to be a ham aid request, you got to call them anyway. The thing about a ham aid is you almost have to pre-position. If you're calling for ham aid right before a major disaster or in the middle of one, which is even worse, you're not likely to get it because FedEx isn't going to be flying. That's how the stuff is shipped out. They have an open contract with FedEx, or they did. I'm not sure what they have now. It may have changed. I know there were some changes, but I don't know if it was to another carrier or not. I did work on the ARES mat a little bit. I've been harping on this for the last several years, and I really haven't got a good sense of how embedded and implemented this has become. I'm really curious to know from the ECs, are we any closer to having a working ARES mat system? Or are we still just, yeah, it's there, because we have to be honest with ourselves. If we have a real emergency, none of us have the depth, may not even have the width to manage a real disaster. And we've been promising ourselves to every Tom, Dick, and Harry agency out there, and we don't have the resources to support one. That's a reality. So if you don't have ARES MAT in place, the ability to respond as well as to call for help, you're really setting yourself up for failure. And there goes our reputation. We've been lucky so far. We've only had little events. Wayne will remember a drill at the state level a few years back. The state held its first ever exercise that wasn't Seabrook or Vermont Yankee related. And it was several days long, over a period of weeks actually, different bits and pieces of it. But there was an operational event, and then there was a tabletop at the very end. And during this, toward the end of it, I guess, was it Wayne? She started talking about different small issues so that they hadn't covered in other ways. One of them was communications failure. And she was going around the room talking to all these different agencies, both state and VOAD, and asking them, well, what are you going to do if your communications fail? And we almost fell out of our chairs. Every single one said, oh, we're going to call the hams. And we're doing the numbers on our fingers really fast and going, we haven't got 500 or 600 people for each shift. Ain't happening, kids. So I stood up and said, okay, this is wonderful, guys. This is what we've always dreamed for. But the reality is it will all be affected by whatever storm is, or emergency is causing the problem in the first place. Not just us, you too. You're going to be short-staffed. We're going to be short-staffed. And so also half our members are pushing 80, which may be an exaggeration, but not too far off. And, we're going to be unable to respond for long periods of time. So we're going to have to call for outside support. And then we talked about the fact that state agencies can't just come to us. They've got to go through ESF2 lead, which in this case is Department of Emergency Communications, Pete Danute. And what was John Wynn's office? I'm not sure what the status of that is at this point. I don't know who's really in charge there. Wayne, do you know?
Well, it's waiting for the pandemic to lighten up a little bit here so we can get in. We just haven't been able to hook up. He's been tied up. It's I can't remember his first name, but we've had the email conversation there.
Yeah.
And I didn't mention that when you shared about the served agencies, but the reason why there was some changes in your plan was because the actual MOU signer has changed too. It used to be out of the State Emergency Management. Now it's out of Department of Safety, Office of Emergency Communications. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the signer. Of course, John is the signature on the.
Yep.
On the.
That's his legacy.
Yeah. So, I mean, physically the station's there. There's no changes, but we haven't been able to get back in because of the pandemic and because of some scheduling. And then right after we made an appointment to meet, we had all the riots, not riots, I'm sorry, the protests, I should say. The protests, and everybody got bogged down with that. So that's kind of lightening up a little bit. So I'll reinitiate
Okay.
that. I want
at least they have somebody in his seat.
Yeah. Well, while we're at the ARES, Matt, maybe you could explain when you say, do you have a working ARES MAT plan at the group level? Maybe you should say what that is, and then maybe some folks can respond if yay or nay.
Yeah, it's two pieces. One is the ability to integrate people from the outside and know when you're going to call. And the other is to be able to deploy a team to someone else to help them. It's like mutual aid for volunteer fire departments. They could not survive without it. And really, we can't either. And we've got to really work on that. It's not a panacea. It's not a fix-all, but it's certainly one hell of a good crutch.
So given that, has anyone built that into their group plan? Now, clearly, at the state level, all we do is talk about ARES MAT, but we don't have assets, so we don't really actually have, the ability to deploy folks. We only can help to coordinate the deployment. But at the group level, where you actually have the members, you have, in theory, have the capability to both receive and to send out. So I'll open it up and see if anybody has thought about that and has built it into their plan. And I would guess that means nobody.
Nobody here anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just have to keep harping on it because, when the proverbial shit hits the fan and you call for help, the one thing that's going to make it quicker to get help to you is if the other guy's got a response plan. If I call an EC and say, geez, we need help down in Eastern Rockingham right now. They just gotten wiped out by this hurricane. And you say, oh, geez, well, we'll work on something. It may take you a day to put something together. But if you've already got a plan in place, this is like a go kit with people in it. You've got a group who have agreed to be your ARES MAT response team if they're called to help with someone else. They can be notified ahead of time. Look, this is happening. We may get called. Be ready. And then when the call does come, they can hit the road running quickly. And then the poor guy who's up to his ears in water is going to get his help a little more quickly. So it's a two-way street. If everybody is ready to respond, everybody else is protected. It's like a mutual insurance policy. It is so important that we all do it. It's without it, we are setting ourselves up to fail right off the bat. When we call for out-of-state resources, it's going to take a day or two. You have to assume that. Even if you could get a bunch of guys out of Massachusetts, which is unlikely because anything that whomps us has probably already whomped them. Same with Connecticut, Rhode Island. Rhode Island would just vanish in terms of ARES capability. They're going to have to be pulling from New York, New Jersey, points further away. And they have to find the people, get them organized. Because I know that not everybody has, ARES MAT set up. They might do what Mike Corey was trying to do and try and organize it on his own every time. His idea of ARES MAT is you call me and I'll go down the database and I'll get you a bunch of people from all over the country. We call it the Puerto Rico model. And the problem is this is like the general always fighting the last war. Puerto Rico is kind of a one-off situation. Hawaii might be like that if it happened there. Not to the same degree because they're a lot better off in the first place. But for every other place, that model may not work. And there needs to be a more flexible model. More people than me thought so. Anyway, that's enough about that for the moment. I just basically took the attachment that was ARES MAT and I boiled it down and stuck it in the plan. So that's how we get rid of that attachment. The VHF, UHF protocols, we cleaned this up a little bit. We used to tell people if the repeater failed, go to your simplex channel. Well, it got pointed out to us quite a few times that that was probably not a good way to do it because if you've got people showing up on the repeater who may not even be members, but wanting to find out if they can help and know what's going on, then you want to be on the repeater frequency. So the fallback is to go simplex on the output. That's pretty much standard through the country, I'm learning, talking to other people. So that's kind of brings us into line. And then you can use your assigned simplex frequencies for other utility purposes. You can put hotlines on there or subnets, a logistics net or something, whatever you need to do. That needs a separate frequency. And we also put high point relay stations in to emphasize the need for those. If you don't have high point relay stations, this is a fun exercise. Go find them. places with can relay to Concord. And the way you would do that with Concord is to have somebody from Concord ARES work with them, capital ARES, have them go sit in the parking lot at the state EOC and see if you can work them. It won't be as good because, or maybe in the upper parking lot, it won't be as good as being on the tower or using Oak Hill, but it'll at least give you an idea whether it can be managed or not. If you could work somebody in a mobile from your High Point relay site, you can definitely get into the state EOC. For those who don't know, the state EOC has 2 antennas on the tower. John and I were never able to figure out which one was which. There's one at about 50 feet off the ground and one at the very top. We are hoping that the top one is VHF, but we were never able to prove that. And the same situation is up at Oak Hill. Oak Hill is linked by microwave, so it's a little bit vulnerable. The microwave link is pretty robust. It's only 5-mile path. But if we lose Oak Hill, that's a major capability lost there. And they have very little capability for amateur radio compared with the old state EOC, if anyone remembers that. That place was amazing. Anyway, leadership succession was the next I did. This is something I think new. I don't think we've ever had a succession plan. And the reason I wrote this was because we got rid of those generic titles and went back to acting. So this gives everybody a path for how to deal with people missing.
Essentially,
It's pretty short.
essentially, Dave, what this is, it maintains a continuity of operations. So a part of a continuity operations plan is, one person, part of it is like, cross-training people, obviously. It also is having a list. If this person's not available, this person takes over the duty, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's other parts of the continuity operations which other organizations need, like we're doing right now with the pandemic, with town halls and police stations and so forth. So this is really is in order to maintain your operation, to continue to be able to operate as a local group or at the state EOC.
Yeah. In fact, I would narrow that a little bit. I call it continuity of leadership. The operations, hopefully the plan takes care of that overall, plans in general. But the leadership continuity is important. Although, if your guys are well trained enough, they could probably function without a leader. And that would be a real testament to you if they can do that. That means everybody's been cross-trained. Everybody knows the plan. Everybody can jump in and do what needs to be done. Where you end up with a problem, however, is when you don't have anybody to make the tough decisions about resources. We get a call to operate on the behalf of 5 or 6 agencies. You only got enough staff for 1. Who do you send it to first? And that's a discussion that's got to be had at the local level and also at the section level. And it's got to be had frequently. It's not a one-off or one and done, because that's a moving target. Depends on particular agencies' plans for us, their needs, and even in the event itself, whether the need is worse for one than the other. So our primary served agency in the state for everybody is the state. And the primary mission is to connect the towns with the state EOC. So they have a way to request help. That's number 1. Number 2 is helping Red Cross. Everything else is tertiary. And it's going to depend on resources available. That's why we want state agencies to go to the ESF2 lead and request help, not to us. We can do pre-planning and pre-training with these agencies, but we don't go to help them until we're sent by the ESF2. And that's important because they have other resources that may prevent us from being swamped. They may have other ways to solve problems. And the last section here, of course, is education, training, and exercises. And this kind of sets out the training program. you know, the section level sets the standards and everyone else trains to the standards. It's basically the bottom line. And the reason for that, of course, is ARES MAT. There's two levels to interoperability. One is the mechanical side. We all have the same radios, same modes, and same frequencies. The other side is the operations. We all have to do the same things in the same way. Otherwise, we can't help each other. In fact, we may not be able to talk to each other. So we have, you know, the old standards like the radiogram, and the radiogram is not just radiogram. It's also anything else that you're doing that's transmitted formal document. But those procedures are universal. What's not so universal is the training on the NBEMS modes and also the WinLink system. We need to make those more universal and use them in the same way so that we can back each other up and communicate with each other. We have a great plan on paper. I'd be scared to death to see what would happen if we tried to implement this in any kind of a major situation right now. I don't think we'd be able to go very far. I think we'd be in big trouble real fast. The SET each year is just not enough. And it's always a partial exercise. It's very seldom done as a real, true, full-scale exercise. And you really can't do a full-scale exercise in one morning. It's just not feasible. It's got to be an all-day event. So basically, this document replaced a whole bunch of others. It replaced sections of the comm plan. It replaced some of the attachments. And it got broken down to 3 sections: general agency support, hospital support, point of distribution support, EAS support, and the only thing that's not here is nuke support. I left that separate. This we call C-book support nowadays. Mm-hmm. So this is really fairly generic. This basically gives the broad strokes of how we support each of these groups. We have a hospital plan. My objection to it, and I've talked with George about this many times, is that it's too big, too detailed. It's a training document as much as it is an operations plan. There's no way you can actually use that as an operations plan on the fly. It's not a good reference document. Too dense. So I boiled it down. Boy, did I boil it. We already covered 90% of what we're going to do with the hospitals in the ARES operations plan. It's not like there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you look at this, you know, first of all, the general agency support, we talk about MOUs, more as a reference to say, look, if there's one out there, read it first, because that's going to dictate how we behave with them. A lot of these MOUs are pretty generic anyway, so it may or may not matter. But if there is specific language in there about how we interface, then we need to know that. I think we don't have very many MOUs right now, do we, Wayne? At least not the section level, just this Red Cross and...
We have, the only section 1 is with the state. We use the national level 1 for other agencies like the Red Cross.
Okay, and same with the Weather Service.
And with the weather, yeah. Any agencies that we have a national relationship, we'll use the ARRL one as kind of a blanket one, unless there's some specifically that they want us to do. You know, there's no reason to build one.
Right.
At the local level, I'm aware of a couple, and then
I think Capital had one with Warner, didn't they?
Well, they're still they haven't completely finalized that one yet. It kind of got started, and then of course, you know, we had a changeover in EC, and then we had a pandemic.
Yeah, well, I think that's actually been going on for about 4 or 5 years.
Well, yeah, but when we hadn't finished it when Russell was there, and then when Rob came on, so we're not quite finished, although we're just like right at the cusp of signing with that. So those are the 2 that I'm aware of, but I was pretty sure there was another one, at least maybe in West Rock. Is that right, Mike? So, local MOUs?
I'm sorry, say that again. You cut out.
A local MOU. Do you have one there in West Rock?
Uh, not as far as a straight line MOU. We have, agreements, and it's in the comp plan with the area emergency management, the South Central Public Health Network, and Parkland, although as with every other hospital right now, access to that at Parkland is restricted because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay.
So these aren't really MOUs. This is just stuff in your operations plan.
Stuff in the operations plan, but it's also more importantly in the operations plan of the same, of the served agencies.
Okay.
They have, the
Shared
phone
plans.
tree list who to get a hold of for my area.
Okay, good. That's a good way to do it. I'm not a fan of MOUs at the local level, only because they may constrain you when you need to have flexibility, or make at least feel constrained, even if they don't do it in fact.
In another comment in regard, I agree with you, Dave, on that. And also, too, you make an agreement, you have to honor that agreement as best you can, and that could get that could also get very difficult if the event happens to be right in your backyard. It could be a real issue.
Yeah, I mean, we know that it's a good faith efforts type of agreement. Not everyone may understand it that way, especially if you've got somebody who's in the agency who's not very sophisticated and has never dealt with this stuff at the executive level. They may not understand that this MOU is not a contract and there's no expectations granted or offered. So anyway, we talk about staffing here. We will assign operators based on availability. We don't really say that here, but let's see. So assignments will be made based on discussions between the agency and ARES. Assignments must require radio communications and may involve related activities. So this is something that's also said somewhere else in the plan. We don't want to be turned into bedpan changers. This is the old thing we've harped on for decades. There have been situations where radio operators at especially Red Cross shelters have been asked to do things that, well, you're not doing it, it's radio. Can you help with this, and hand out food? And pretty soon there's no one at the radio for long stretches of time. That's actually happened to us. So that's why it's in here, to remind people that we are radio people. If you want to make us a radio dispatch driver, go for it. Radio dispatch bedpan changer, and not so much. We talk about net support, client ARES stations. So you have an agency ARES station, we'll support them with the regular ARES nets. And you might also use point-to-point hotline circuits. The reason that's in there is because of the hospitals, and we cover that in the same way in the hospitals. We want people to know that we're not going to be setting up a separate net for agency number 5, whoever they are. We have a common carrier system in effect. The section net and the local nets are the common carrier. And if we put agency stations on the air, they have access to that common carrier network. We do not set up special networks for each agency. That's an expectation that we've had to deal with the hospitals. I think we're still dealing with that to some degree, but we don't have the resources to be able to pull off a separate operation for them. They just don't exist. So let's see what else we got here. Modes, primary mode is voice. Agency needs dictated. We can use an approved digital text mode, such as NBEMS or WinLink. Anything with local infrastructure should be avoided. That's a planning issue, of course. Operator support. We talk about how much physical support our operators are going to be given. It's going to vary from time to time and site to site. Most agencies will do their best. We want to let agencies know that we kind of expect that. If we've shipped you an operator, unless you've told us that he's got to be completely autonomous, we expect you to take care of him. And of course, the ARES operators are responsible for their own safety, and you should bail if you're not safe and notify leadership. Hospital support, basically the same kinds of things. Although I'm very pointed here about the hospital stations will be operated by regularly assigned ARES operators and available licensed hospital staff. The regularly assigned part is really important. Anybody who works with the hospitals knows this firsthand. If you don't have a relationship with the hospital, good luck walking in the front door to help them, no matter how much they need your help. Those guys are checklist people. If you don't have credentials, if you're not on their list, good luck. Hospital will have to be burning down for to let you in the door. Maybe not even them. That's why it's here in the very short form, but be aware of that. Part two on this is that the net support is, again, the common carrier system. We don't set up separate networks for the hospitals. In a very limited situation, we might do that. It might be certain hotline circuits, or if the hospitals are really the only people we're serving, we might break that off if they're the major people we're serving at a given time. The thing about the hospitals we got to remember is that we aren't even a tertiary backup. I don't know how you call fifth in line or sixth in line, wherever we are. They have so many more backup modes now than they used to that we are almost superfluous. And that needs to be kept in mind. Where the hospitals become valuable to us is as a really well protected location. They're very hardened. They've got good emergency power in most cases. They've got sometimes hardened communications. Their facilities tend to be pretty robust physically, on high ground in most cases, not all. So those things need to be kept in mind too, because we can put them to use for other reasons. Point distributions for I thank Fletch for putting this together in a way over years past. He has explained to me how they've done their pod drills, and that has become the template on which I wrote this. And you notice how short it is. It's 3 paragraphs, not 4, but fourth paragraph is 2 sentences. And it's just very rough outline of how we will support a pod, because we really had nothing in the past. I didn't see any point in trying to create a very detailed attachment for this, because it is really very simple. The idea of a pod, and this is something everyone can train on, this is fairly straightforward. You get together with a pod drill being done by your local health departments and show them how to do this. One of their models has always been, we're going to hand the lead nurse or somebody in each nursing team a FRS radio, and we'll talk to each other when we need to. Well, guess what? You all know what happens. Nurses don't want to hear that chatter. Down goes the volume, or off goes the radio, and then everybody else is calling to the blue in the face and no one's answering. And someone has to run over there and tap the nurse on the shoulder and say, we're calling you on the radio. Oh, I don't know what happened to my radio. I've seen this happen in other events so many times. Public service events, fortunately not pods. But what we do is we become their telephone booth. We sit there with a pair of headphones on. We don't disturb them one little bit. We're just sitting there waiting till a call comes through for the group that you're supporting within the pod. And when the call comes through, you hand the microphone and the headphones to the nurse who needs to be talked to, and you get out of the way. Pretty simple. EAS support is something new. It has never been really tested. It's never been trained for. We had a presentation from EAS several years ago, and that was by Ed Browder, who was at that time unemployed. He wasn't even in the broadcast business. He's now back working for public radio. He's got a job again. But he is the lead from the New Hampshire Association of Broadcasters. He handles the emergency communications for them, which is EAS. The idea is that if they lose part of the EAS backbone between the state EOC and any of the lead stations especially, we would be asked to fill in. John Wynn was familiar with this plan. He and I walked through it. He thought it might work. We never did get a chance to drill it or test it. So that's something for the future that could be thought about. If you have one of those stations in your backyard, having a path to Concord might be really good, even if it's a relay path from a high point. Something else to think about. The one trick is going to be WHOM. I'm not even sure they have a transmitter in New Hampshire anymore. Do you know if they're still up on Mall Washington, anyone? I know their signal sucks now.
I think WHOM was part of that building that burned several years ago.
Yeah, I don't know if they ever moved back up there or not. Or if maybe they're in a lower power mode now. It's, I think they are still one of our lead stations, but I don't know for a fact. And that may be something in this plan that's still out of date. I pulled my information from the EAS website. I don't know if Ed's kept that up to date either. I haven't called him to ask, but that's something I might want to do. His phone number is here. I'm not even sure that's accurate at this point, but he did agree to be the contact point. So he's in the plan. This is one of those places where verbatim messages will be really, really important. You paraphrase one of these messages, oh man, I don't want to be around when it hits the fan. I want to be far, far away. Yeah, so the areas that are going to be affected are going to be Central New Hampshire, Stratford, Hillsborough, Greater Manchester in both cases. Here's 2 stations. Cheshire County, Sullivan County, which is covered now by West Central. And then we have Central New Hampshire for WLNH. I don't think we've got anything like a clear path into Sullivan County. That would have to be a relay. We got a hill. Bly Hill and Newberry is a perfect hill for that. Well, it could be fun to get up in the middle of winter. Any questions on any of this? I know nobody's piped up.
We hadn't changed that Sullivan County. Well, this is a new attachment.
Yeah, this is new. I didn't change that. You're right.
Yeah.
I can do that right now. This is still a draft.
Yeah.
Wayne, rather Lane, Dave, I've got a little bit of a question.
Sure.
Okay. Was it a week or so ago? We had that very good presentation on shares that several of us attended the Zoom meeting. And
Yep.
One of the things that the gentleman that was presenting pointed out, and, this is kind of the issue, you don't go into the state or you don't go into an agency and say, this is what we can do for you. It's what do you want? And with the addition of all the CERT groups, these local emergency managers, well, the CERT group would just about do anything. And the amateurs, they only want to play radio. And it's that thing, you go in and ask them what they want. And if, you have to then make the decision. If they say, well, we want you to change bedpans, well, thank you very much for the opportunity, but no thanks.
Yeah. I think you have to preface the what do you need question with, we are a communications organization. What do you need in the way of communications? You limit it right off the bat. And I think his point was that too many hams show up at the front door of an agency. You don't want to do this during a disaster because that's playing the wrong time, period. Unless they're in deep trouble. We have communications. Can we help you? It's a good way to do it during an emergency. If you lost anything, we can replace for you. But, coming in the door and then saying, here's this smorgasbord Chinese menu of all this stuff we can do. And I've seen guys do this. In fact, I've seen it during actual events. There'd be some gung-ho Joe Ham, not even one of our leaders, talking to one of the agency people. Oh, we hams can do this, we can do that, we can bounce signals off the moon, we got satellites in space. What do you need? We can do it all. And I'm going, shut up. You're setting expectations that can't be met. And you're offering things that are irrelevant, that we're not trained for. And, you know, amateur television was another one I hear. Oh, we can do fast scan TV and slow scan TV, and we can set up repeaters. Yeah, with about 3 years notice. You know, these guys don't understand. And that's another reason to make sure that you're the one talking to your agencies and not your members. It's a conversation to have with your members. You know, explain to them that the rank and file do not integrate or do not, how you put it, they're not going to be talking to the leadership at the agencies. And you're not there to promote amateur radio. You're there to fill a specific need at that time and place. And the rest of it, just keep your mouth shut. Yes, some other time you can talk about amateur radio, but that's not the time during an emergency or a training event. We're there to do a job, be professional, do the job, and leave the sales pitch to the EC. Who will know that you only ask, you don't offer? You don't hand them the Chinese menu. You may regret doing that because they may ask for stuff that we can't do.